All right, guys, here we are. We are live, and I'm seeing the attendee list. Ding, 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 ding. Pop on. We got a really fun webinar for you today, guys. We are talking Warmboard and radiant floor heating today. This is a sponsored event, so we've got some pretty prominent people from the Warmboard side. I'm going to introduce y'all in a minute. But we've got about 1 minute till we start. We're still waiting on the attendees to keep funneling through the door. I think I'm showing like 70 some people on the line now. I appreciate y'all taking a few minutes in your afternoon, whether you're East Coast or West Coast, to spend with us. And we've got a good cast of characters for you today. Let me, while we're still waiting on attendees, let me take a minute to kind of introduce people, and then I'll do a shorter one later. But by way of long introduction, to my right, I don't know which side he is on your screen, but Steve Baczek. You probably have seen Steve in my videos and on Build Show Network before. It is a huge privilege for me over these years to have gotten to know Steve. Steve, I think we met, what, 4 or 5 years ago now? Something like that?
Something like that. So
it hasn't been that long in the scheme of things. And I swear, every time I'm with you, I'm like the knowledge sponge coming off of you. It's just sweating off of your pores, man. Well, incredible architect, incredibly experienced builder and designer, and really one of the best building science experts in the nation. So it's a huge privilege to have you, Steve, here today and shooting videos on buildshownetwork.com.
Well, you're likewise. Every time I'm around you, I learn something. I think it's just, the conversations that we generate when we're together that, everybody should be having. That when you have 2 or 3 people in the room, you guys should be chatting it up and finding out what the other guy's doing and trying to figure out how can we better ourselves. I strive to do that every day.
100%.
With the people I chat with, and I love having you in town. Last week was a huge treat to walk around.
Yeah. Steve and I spent 4 or 5 days together. We shot a bunch of videos, so stay tuned for that. On the other side of your screen, let me introduce you to the guys from Warmboard. We've got 2 prominent players from Warmboard. We've got the president of Warmboard, Brian Alsberg. Brian, wave for us, if you will, just so we know who you are. And then to his left or right, I'm not sure which direction that is, but whatever is on your screen, the slightly older Alsberg is Terry Alsberg, who's actually the inventor of the Warmboard. Give us a wave, if you would, Terry. So we've got the 2 big dogs on the Warmboard side. Got a lot of good information for you today. I also was shocked by how many of you emailed ahead of time. I have like a bunch of emails from you with questions, even when we announced the webinar, let alone today. So logistics, before we get rolling, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen right there. Any questions that you have, guys, as the webinar is proceeding, throw it on the Q&A section right there. That's the best way to get a hold of me and get a question out to me. I'm maybe kind of scrolling through those as we're talking, but for the most part, I'm going to save about 20 or so minutes, maybe 25 minutes towards the end of this hour to do nothing but answer questions, because I know a bunch of you had some questions about using it, speccing it, designing for it, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into that. But first, let's overview why we were interested in Radiant to begin with. And I'm going to direct this first question to you, Steve. What's your experience with Radiant? What do clients say about it? What do the builders you work with say about installing it? Give me your couple 2 or 3 minute kind of overview of why Radiant to begin with, before we even get into the specifics of Warmboard or floors in general.
I mean, my experience has been, clients kind of migrate in that direction because it is the most comfortable way to deliver heat, right? Our surface temperature is roughly about 85 degrees. So even if we deliver air to the room that's 72 degrees, it's not as comforting as getting something closer to that surface temperature. And the idea of walking across the floor and having that direct contact with the floor, whether it's in a bathroom or living room or kitchen, but having that direct contact is always highly desirable by clients, always. And, builders love to put it in too, because it's it is one of those items that it benefits the client, but it also, you know, benefits the builder in that they get to build a better product that's a little bit more luxurious and, you know, a little more client desirable, if you will.
There's a certain client delight, I think, that comes with radiant heating, and specifically radiant floor heating, that makes people want to talk about it at a party. That makes people go, "Hey, take your shoes off. Check this out. Feel this at my house." It's just something I think that that is totally different than people's experience with forced air cooling. Terry, question for you. You're the original inventor of Warmboard. Give us the history. Tell us the story. How did you get into this? What made you come up with this product that we're going to be talking about today?
I first learned about radiant heat when I was in college, because every architect is taught that the Romans invented it, and it was the first form of central heat, and that it's the most comfortable form of heat. So I always had that floating around in my brain. I had a number of clients who had asked me for radiant heat. I put it in their houses, and initially it was done with thin pour gypsum concrete, and it just seemed like a dumb way to build a house, because you're adding about 15 pounds per square foot of dead load to the house. There's a lot of moisture is released into the house. And it's very, very slow. And it used to be that historically radiant was known to be a system you waited for your heat. And you never use nighttime setback. You never use vacation setback, because it's just too slow. And so along the way, after I'd done a couple of houses for some clients, I was going to remodel my own house. And my background, by the way, I started off in engineering physics before I switched to architecture. So I had some thermodynamic background. It seemed dumb to me to be using concrete to conduct heat, because that's what a radiant panel does. It simply conducts heat from water to the surface of your floor, period, end of sentence. So the best radiant system is going to be the most conductive one. So it seems pretty obvious that it should have aluminum in it, because aluminum, there's a reason why we make frying pans out of aluminum and not concrete. So somebody's accused me of being such a do-it-yourselfer that if I could drill my own teeth, I would. And so because I was remodeling my own house, I decided I would come up with a better method. And I only ever intended to do it as a one-off just for my house. And I doodled on my drafting table one afternoon. I tried to see if there was a single base panel or a few panels that could do the serpentine pattern of loops that you could do in any house with a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And I came up with it literally in about 15 minutes one afternoon, back in about 1992. Filed a patent on it. Patent got issued in 1998. And we launched in the market in about 1998. And since then, we've done about 30 million square feet of Warmboard throughout North America, and a little bit internationally too. We've done some down in Australia, a few in Europe. We've done 2 projects in Antarctica. And we actually did, people always wonder how cold of a climate can you use radiant heat in. We did a bunch of oil workers housing for up in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, a couple hundred of those. They got built in Louisiana's modular homes and barged up to Alaska. That's the balmy north shore of Alaska, where the caribou and the pineapples are grown, and the Riviera of Alaska. And so that's kind of like the real background of it. You know, I got a patent on it, and we originally were a division of Geldwin, and then they spun us out as an independent company in 2002, and that's been Warmboard ever since.
Very cool. And ultimately, the heart of your system is really just 2 components. And my assumption is this was part of your kind of original invention. You really kind of have just two options when it comes to Warmboard, if you can see those. You've got the Warmboard R, and you've got the Warmboard S. R for remodel, and S for structural. So the remodel is a 3/4 panel, right, Terry? And then the structural is an 1 1/8 that would get installed structurally, typically new construction, right over your I-joist, maybe your subfloor, or your, whatever your floor system is going to be. And then there's an aluminum skin on this. Terry, how thick is that aluminum skin? It seems like that would be really hard to bend in manufacturing to get into that space where that tubing is going to go.
That's an interesting thing. When I was trying to prototype it myself in my garage, typical garage experiment, I thought, oh, it'll be really easy. I'll just pound the aluminum down. It shouldn't be all that hard. Turns out that we actually make it with a 600-ton press that's about 2 stories tall. So it takes a lot of effort to push that aluminum around in some dies that weigh about 1,000 pounds. that are very complex steel dies. And so it turns out it's not easy to make Warmboard. It was quite a bit of development process just to get that done. And I did that with, fortunately, I had Geldwin behind me. They're a very big company, as you probably know, anybody that's familiar with Geldwin. And so we had the R&D money to develop this. And, but I got to say, you know, that the very first drawings I did in 1992, the product has hardly changed at all since then. Basically, I kind of got it right. I kind of liken it to sheetrock. I mean, sheetrock hasn't really changed since it was invented about 1920, 1930. I mean, we have some variations on it, you know, veneer board and green board and things like that. But basically with Warmboard, the concept was really simple. What would happen if we took a 4x sheet of structural subfloor, tongue and groove, and put a pattern of grooves in it, stamped some aluminum to match the groove pattern, and bonded it permanently to the plywood and framed your house with it. And that's it. Now, we did follow it on, just like I said, sheetrock migrated a little bit. The Warmboard R product came by a few years later when we had a lot of people wanted to do retrofit. They didn't need the structure of the subfloor. And so we made a 2-foot by 4-foot sheet that's 3/4 of an inch thick that we use for remodels. And a lot of times we mix and match them. A lot of times in my architectural practice, I think about half my houses were addition remodels. And so we would, you know, gut the original house and put down a Warmboard R there, and then in the new section, put the Warmboard S, or if it's new construction, you use Warmboard S.
Now, Terry, that brings up an interesting question for the builders here that are thinking about this 1.125" plywood, basically, with an aluminum facer. How am I installing that? You know, I'm used to installing 1.125" Advantech maybe, or some other enhanced OSB or plywood subfloor. I'm used to gluing it and nailing it or maybe screwing it. Same process with this. What do we do differently when we've got that aluminum facer on there?
It was the ultimate inventive step, and what is one of the bases for the patent was that we wanted to be compatible. All radiant that was done prior to us was you build a house first, then you add the radiant to it. We decided what would happen if you made it an integral part of conventional platform frame construction. And so whenever any contractor asks us, how do you do it? You say, if you got a set of bags and a skill saw and a nail gun, you already know how to install it. It's just subfloor. It cuts with a skill saw, it nails with a nail gun or screws. I'd say more people are screwing now than nailing, but both work. Typically, you're going to put panel adhesive on top of the joist. You're going to drop the panels down just like you would a regular 4x sheet of plywood. Bash it around with a sledgehammer and a 4x4 a little bit until it's in place. We supply alignment pins that allow the grooves to line up perfectly to go from sheet to sheet to sheet. And so you just put it down a course of plywood, the first 4-foot course like you would with any subfloor. You get that nice and straight, and you make sure all the next courses follow that. And I say the throwaway technical advice is do with Warmboard what you would do with any other structural subfloor. It's not delicate. You can put saw horses on it, you know, table saws on it, drag ladders across it. It's not going to hurt it. And you treat it just like subfloor.
Now, Terry, once that subfloor is down and ultimately you have a finished floor on top of it, is the tubing that's at the top and kind of in contact with your floor, let's say you have a hardwood floor and there's your tubing that's warm, is that tubing directly radiating to, there you go, is that tubing directly radiating to the floor, or is that aluminum, kind of like what you mentioned earlier with the cooking pot, really transferring that heat out and then moving it? And tell me about the differences between Warmboard and a poured gypcrete floor that might have radiant tubing, or a basement subfloor that might have radiant tubing in it.
Well, I've already said that the #1 job of a radiant panel is simply to conduct heat from water in a tube to the surface of your floor. And in terms of thermodynamics, aluminum's a great conductor, and it's going to be a better conductor if the tube makes very good contact with the aluminum. So as you can see in the panel here, the aluminum wraps around, and I think you showed it on your sample there, if you could show sideways. The aluminum wraps around 180 degrees of the perimeter of that tube, so the contact of the aluminum with the tube is very, very good. And then as you can see from my sample here, you nail hardwood directly on top of it. People ask, well, how do you install hardwood? I said, well, nails if you'd like, or you can nail and glue, or staples, or any way you would normally put hardwood on top of any subfloor. And the hardwood is in direct contact with the aluminum plate. So the tube makes very good contact with the aluminum plate. Finished floor makes very good contact with the aluminum plate. And as a result, the conductive path is just simply more efficient than any other radiant panel that's ever come down the pike. And that's our bragging rights. And the way that you can tell that is as conductivity goes up, water temperature goes down. And so our bragging right is we use the lowest water temperatures for a given amount of heat required of any radiant system. And that does a bunch of things for you. First off, if you're low in water temperature, you're saving energy because it's always cheaper to heat water to a low temperature than to a high temperature.
What are those two temperatures? If we had a 2-inch gypcrete with tubing on it versus Warmboard, what are the two supply temperatures, would you say, typically out there?
You'll typically see a gypcrete system will be happening in maybe the 110 to 150 range. They can't go over 150 because it degrades the gypcrete, but it's usually in about that 110 to 150 range. We're typically in about the 90 to 110 degree range. So we're typically on average, maybe about 30 degrees lower in water temperature for most conditions. And what that does is give you tremendous reserves of performance. So another kind of no-no, typically what people consider was a no-no with radiant heat was carpet, because carpet's kind of an insulator. And I said, well, actually, that's a problem only if you have a poor conductor. If you have a great conductor, we have so much horsepower, we see people put wool carpets on top of Warmboard and it works fine. And now you may have to bump the water temperature up. Maybe we're starting to operate in your gypcrete water temperatures, but we got carpet on top, for Christ's sake.
Wow,
but it is nice to know that you can put, and by the way, you see this hardwood floor here. People forget that when most people do hardwood floors, which has an R value of about 1, it's a good match for radiant heat from the resistance. The carpet, almost everybody puts area rugs on top of their hardwood. Now, you usually will cover about 50% of their hardwood with a nice thick wool Oriental rug or Chinese rug or artistic rug. And so they don't work very well. And if you design just for the hardwood, you forget that people decorate their homes. And we figured you should be able to have any option you want in floor coverings. That's another one of our bragging rights. There's really no limitation whatsoever on floor coverings. We do it with tile, stone, hardwood. We do hardwood with floating hardwood, wide plank hardwood, glue and nail, glue only, nail only, and carpet. When you put carpet on top of it, you just stretch carpet and pad like you would with regular carpet tack strips. The tack strips nail right into our panel. And that's another nice thing about it too, is the essence of platform frame construction. So you have this nice big wood platform that you can attach things to, whether it's cabinets or flooring or whatever. And we're the same as that. So when you install cabinets, when you put tack strips down, when you put hardwood down, everything attaches to this wood platform, and it's a big part of the whole efficiency of platform frame construction. And we're compatible with that. We're an integral part of platform frame construction.
Love it, Terry. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Terry, because I want you to walk through a couple of the components and systems. But first, I want to hear from Steve for a minute. Steve, let's back up a second and let's talk about your experiences with Radiant, whether it's Warmboard or not. Give us some idea of several things. I'm interested to know how you talk clients into it, or whether clients ask for it specifically. I'm interested to know what the process is from your perspective with doing an install like this. And talk to me about kind of the system from Warmboard specifically. We were on a job last week with it. That video is coming up soon on my YouTube channel, but talk to me about some of those things.
So my experience with Radiant prior to Warmboard, I did a house probably 12 years ago, almost 9,000 feet, where we did staple up Radiant underneath the floor sheathing, and the builder did it himself. It was actually his house, and it was horrible because, like Terry was saying, and this is probably true in the science of heating, getting compatible loads satisfied is real easy. The problem is always distribution, right? How do I get the best bang for heating up that water or heating up that air or electrical coil, whatever the case is? I always tell people you want to convert that energy as easy as possible and as efficient as possible, but then you want to hold on to it for a very long time. So the older systems, hoses underneath, one of the problems was, how do I get that heat out and into my feet? And it didn't really spread. Like if we went in there with a thermal camera, I'm sure we would see some nice bright lines snaking around, and then it would be, it would cool towards the middle of those hoses, and then it would get red hot again. And from a builder's perspective, you think about a 9,000 square foot house where you're working overhead the whole time. Picking it up.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, I mean, he had a shoulder workout for about 4 weeks. His guys putting that in, so that's problematic to builders working overhead. I've also done the systems where you screw up the aluminum panels and then you snap in the hoses underneath. So that was the beginning of how do we spread that distribution and how do we get that heat to a more comforting level. But where Warmboard knocks it out of the park is, you can see in the panels behind you, that aluminum goes edge to edge. So you're basically heating up the whole floor with this highly conductive system. I'm installing it from above, right? So I'm not getting that shoulder workout anymore. I'm doing it from above from a remodeling standpoint, and from new construction standpoint, it's fully integrated into the floor sheathing now. So it's not necessarily an add-on system, it's an enhanced floor sheathing. You can look at it in that respect, right?
That's a great way to say it.
It works very, very well in that regard. And it's, the other thing that I would commend on, and it's my way of thinking and everything that I do also, is that how do we just enhance what we're already doing, right? So builders are already putting down a floor sheathing. They're already gluing it down. They're screwing it down. They're nailing it down. Well, Terry's and Warmboard's system is basically, just don't screw that panel down, screw this panel down, and then have the plumbers take over. So it's kind of business as usual. And in the house that we're doing the remodeling job, most of the panels were installed by the Finnish carpenters. So these are guys that Finnish carpenters, especially, I'm not going to knock the rest of the country, but Finnish carpenters in New England have a certain, hey, it's furniture quality in everything I do, right?
I love it.
So working with Warmboard and having these guys there, and for these guys to say, man, Steve, this system was exceptional and went down no problem. Well, to me, that's a huge praise, because it's not the framing carpenter saying it. These are Finnish carpenters that, they understand what a 16th of an inch is. So when they talk about things in high praise, then you have to recognize that, yeah, this is a system that, certainly makes sense, and it's their pre-planning is exceptional, and we'll get into that a little bit more later in the webinar. But
actually, let's if you don't mind, Steve, let's jump into that now. That's a great segue into that. I'm noticing you and I know for sure could talk for 6 hours on this topic.
Yeah.
But we're already at 20 after. Let's transition to the rest of the system. We talked a lot about these 4x8 panels, whether it's new construction or the remodel panel, and the tubing. I think we've kind of spent a little bit of time. People kind of get the system. Let's talk about all the other things that are behind the scenes. And
I know Terry talked about it being 180 degrees, but that aluminum is rolled to bite the hose a little. So when you tap it in with the butt of the hammer, it doesn't pop back out, right? It snaps in there a little, so it's just tight enough where it's squeezing on that pipe a little. And the other thing, I was just going through my notes that I wanted to mention, when you're working up above as opposed to all those staple up systems below, well, guess how many leaks we had in that 9,000 square foot house? Because when you're putting in the hardwood floor of that, you're kind of guessing on where those hoses are. In this system, guess what? And you'll see it in the video that you and I made last week when we talk about it, but the guy nailing the hardwood floor has full visual access to the tubing. So
knows exactly where it is.
Yeah, if he nails that, then we need to fire him and get somebody else behind the nail gun, because he's obviously half blind. But that's all these things about systems that are taken care of that a lot of people just don't recognize, right? They say, oh yeah, what's so great about it? Well, the greatness of this system is in its simplicity, in the sense that it's something I'm already putting in. It's something that has visual access to through the whole installation until it's covered up. And all of these things make your job as a builder faster, better, but most importantly, at a very low risk, right? You're not,
Yep.
and I think, Terry, you even suggest that you fill the system with air when you're installing the hardwood floor, right?
Yeah, it's a good idea to pressurize your system and monitor that pressure. You can just take an air hose and blow it up to like 120 psi. And then if you do happen to inadvertently put a nail where it doesn't belong, you know, people always ask me, how do you avoid hitting the tubes? You kind of suggest, I said, I recommend doing your nailing in daylight hours with your eyes open and don't have too many cocktails first. And if you follow those strictures, you probably won't have a problem. But if you do hit it, you know, you can, you know, the air will leak out of it, and it's an easy to repair thing too, because it's not buried in concrete or underneath another subfloor. I'd say it's both air resistant because you can see the tubes when you're nailing to it, and it's air tolerant, which means if you do happen to screw up, you're going to cut the tube in half right at the puncture, put a coupler in and stick it right back down in the groove. It's about 15 minutes to fix a leak. And it's funny, you were telling the story about doing staple up with hardwood. I mean, I've heard lots of stories about where people did staple up, installed hardwood, and turned their radiant system into a sprinkler system, and which is not good.
Right. But
guys, let me do a screen share, and I'll show a couple pictures of a few of those things that we were talking about, and can keep talking. Y'all can see my my image here from Steve's job site last week.
Yeah, so they're, you know, Drago and friends are putting in, that's a 5-inch white oak floor that we're going over the top with, that is getting nailed and glued down on top of the panels. So you can see that they have their sausage tubes of adhesive there. So they're putting it down. I think you took a picture of, I won't, rather than try and guess at it, I know you took a picture of exactly what that adhesive was, because he handed you the tube, I remember.
Yeah, let's see here, Steve, where is that? Here's actually them nailing it real quick, if you want to see it.
Yeah. You know, I mean, you get to see everything there, so
it's one of the reasons why we work really well with hardwood too, is because the Hardwood Flooring Council suggests that you should nail hardwood flooring at 6 to 8 inches on center. And because as you can see, our tubes are 12 inches apart, so you're typically going to put 2 nails in between each pair of tubes. You're going to get 6-inch on center nailing. And because our 1.1/8 plywood is so thick, it's excellent nail holding power. So we find you get more stable wood floors with virtually no cupping or crowning at all, because of the ability to fasten it, and also the fact that you can glue to it. I once explained to an architect, and he couldn't believe what we did just to put that aluminum on that panel. There are other aluminum panels out there, but they're not really designed to be glued to, because aluminum is not an easy material to glue to, and you can't paint it because it has an oxide coating that makes glues not stick to it. So we chromate treat our aluminum on both sides, and then we coat it with an epoxy backer on the bottom side, and then glue it with a reactive hot melt to our wood panel, which is such a tenacious glue that, and the APA that regulates the manufacturer of our panel, they do random tests where they try and pull the aluminum off. It always shreds wood. So the wood fails, not the aluminum, not the glue. Wow. And then the top surface has that same chromate treatment and then a polyester paint. And that allows it to work with all, Tile Council of America is certified to work with all thin sets. And if you're using a wood flooring adhesive, Bana, Baczek, and Sika have all certified that we are perfect for using with their adhesives. So that's the reason why companies like Carlisle Wide Plank and stuff like that love us, because they do wide plank, which requires gluing and nailing.
Right.
And with most other radiant systems, but whether it's a gypcrete, which is difficult to glue to, or whether it's any other aluminum system, which doesn't really lend itself to gluing, but with Warmboard, it's perfect for gluing too.
Right. Yep. This was a Bana adhesive, I believe, right? That we used here.
Yeah, that's right.
Bana works fine with us.
Yeah. So
let's let me show a couple pictures from this particular install, because this is a remodel. Steve, talk us through what we've got. So this, if I remember correctly, is the homeowner's original boiler, right?
That's the existing boiler that the homeowner just purchased. I think it was like 8 or 9 years old, and you know, his desire was not to get rid of it, but was there a way to integrate the system to this? And you know, the Warmboard people were exceptional. It wasn't, you know, it's interesting because as an architect, you can go to companies and say, hey, we have this existing condition. This is what we need for a solution. And you get some companies, well, yeah, you can use it, but we'd really prefer you to use our system. And, you know, they're always trying to get you to use the whole thing. Warmboard wasn't like that. They were like, sure, we'll figure it out, and we'll design a system that fully integrates your existing system there, and we'll certainly just build around it. So they were exceptionally well at, you know, good at that.
And so, Steve, walk me through this picture. This is the layout that's all going to the tubing upstairs that the plumber organized downstairs in the mechanical room on this job.
Right. So you have the, I mean, I don't think I can point to it, but on the left in the circle of copper pipes there, you have a little blue box, which is basically the mixing valve. That goes down to a pump that's near the floor, which is basically the primary pump. And you can see that that feeds a copper line just above the floor there. And that feeds up to the 3 manifolds. And so in this house, I believe we had something like 7 zones and 24 loops. And the reason for that is because you were limited to 300 feet per loop, because that's what, you know, the temperature and such, so that when it's returning, you still have some energy in that line throughout that 300 feet. So it's not like the last 50 feet is doing nothing. So
in other words, Steve, this zone 5 that I'm showing here, this is a 285-foot loop, and it's a home run, kind of like home run plumbing, right? So when it leaves, it goes there continuous and all the way back.
Yep.
And this chart, which is, by the way, produced by Warmboard as part of your package, they're going to give you full construction drawings and details. We're just showing you one.
If you let me share my screen, what I can do is
yeah, you want to
show you. I have the drawing up here.
Good, Steve. You should be able to take it now.
Yep.
By the way, if you're listening, we're going to switch to Q&A in about 10 minutes or so. Pop your question down in the Q&A section if you've got a question for us.
You should be able to see this. Do you see it now?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is the whole house panel layout. And you know, you were talking about my association with Warmboard. One of the things I want to point out is, you know, it's myself and my daughter is the whole Steve Baczek Architect company, and we do a lot of work a year. We pump out a phenomenal amount of work. But the reason we can do that is because we team up with really good partners in what we do, meaning that, you know, companies like Warmboard simply become an extension of our office, right? I don't need to draft up. I don't need to worry about the panels. They ask for the background, and then 2 weeks later, I get a drawing to review that has the panel layout, all the loop layouts, and everything there, that we can go back with a couple questions, a couple modifications, and, you know, in a matter of weeks, we've gone from, hey, we want to use a radiant floor heating system, to a fully integrated panel layout, tube layout, radiant floor heating design that it was literally a matter of hours for my involvement, right? Not weeks, not days, but literally just a couple hours reviewing, get a couple questions answered. They were exceptionally prompt and knowledgeable about all the questions that we asked. You know, one of the things I love to do is challenge systems a little here and there, regardless of who I'm working with. But yeah, and you can see here in the panel layout, I think, can you see my mouse moving?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, you can see all the panel layouts, but one of the things that I thought was exceptional is when they do this kind of thing, you can see here, it says shared panel, typical. Well, these are shared panels that they take a full panel and cut, and then the cutoffs are in other places, shared panels. So it's not like they're in the factory just cutting these things to size and tossing them. They're figuring out what is an economical way to take these panels, do a layout where we can use, you know, almost all of the panels that they're cutting for this system. And, you know,
we're always trying to drive towards absolute minimum waste. And
Yeah.
it's kind of counterintuitive for a business. Maybe we'd like to sell more panels, but we actually try and sell you less panels if we can, just enough to take care of the job. If you end up with like 2 or 3 scraps left over at the end of the job, we won. And you
Yeah,
won.
and
That's awesome.
the builder was actually impressed because he's the one that brought it to my attention. He's like, you know, they have this thing thoroughly thought out, and the whole jigsaw puzzle went together. You know, there wasn't a problem. This was flawlessly executed by the contractors out there with not one hiccup. And a lot of that is, as Terry knows, being an architect and myself, is that planning is everything. And when you get a plan like this, that allows you to not have problems, not have mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
It's really part of our core business philosophy. I read a book once that says the biggest single correlation with repeat business is ease of transaction. We work our tails off to try and make it as easy as possible to do business with us. And I want to go, before we get into the Q&A, I want to go briefly into what we've added to the Warmboard offering, if we have time for it now, to talk about the comfort system, something that we launched only about a year ago, and it's really taken off like gangbusters.
Hey, Steve, will you unshare so I can pull up a couple images? And Terry, talk to us about the comfort system. I'll pull some images up for you.
Yeah, now we've been in business for about 22 years now, and we've always struggled with the fact that Radiant was very difficult to install because you needed a specialist that could. You've seen some of those drawings or some of those pictures you had where there's walls of pumps and a lot of plumbing, and it's all very, very complicated. And not a lot of plumbers can do that. You need a Radiant specialist to do it. There's a good example of what I'm talking about. And we decided, let's fix that. My dad used to tell me the best engineer was a lazy man. He's just trying to find an easier way to do something. We like to consider ourselves incredibly lazy. So, or we hope that you're lazy and that you'll choose the lazy man's alternative. That whole wall that you see there, it's in that stainless steel cabinet now. And so this is a boiler room in a box, so to speak. There's a little bit of corresponding equipment that goes alongside of it, but not much. And the pump, there's a single pump inside, and there's all the electronics and controls are inside. And when we developed it, we developed an entire suite of components. I don't know if you had earlier, one of the slides showed the thermostat and the manifold controller. I don't know if you can pull that one up.
Yep. I think I've got that. Here's the thermostat.
There's a thermostat. There is.
And here's the manifold and the controller.
Yeah, and you'll notice that all the actuators plug in. It's plug and play. That's what's inside of the box. Expansion tank, pumps, all there's basically the system right there. And you'll notice, by the way, we tried to make the thermostat very, very attractive. Actually, when we started off on this whole journey of the comfort system, I started 6 years ago on this. We've been developing this for 6 years. And the first departure was, I wanted a thermostat that said Warmboard on it, because I was tired of everybody thinking that they had a Honeywell heating system because everybody has a Honeywell thermostat. So we wanted a logo on it. Then we decided, well, how do we make it attractive? And so we wanted to make it slim and compact. So it's about the size of a smartphone. It has an e-ink display on it. And it's very, very clean and elegant. And, a lot of architects hate thermostats. We call them wall acne or wall rash. You see all these little boxes on your home. And so, and architects also talk about designing in the vernacular, where we use familiar forms that we're used to. And so it's exactly the same width and height as a Decora switch plate. And typically it's going to be found at about 12 inches above your switch plate when you enter a room. And you don't need a manual to program it. Here he's setting nighttime setback on it. Now just hit the yes button.
Sorry, I can't see you upside down.
And then hit done. If you guys were paying attention, what he did was in about 10 or 15 seconds, do nighttime setback. Nobody else does that. It's by the way, we've applied for a patent on our GUI. It's a very unique GUI and user interface. And
it feels like an Amazon Kindle device.
Well, it is. By the way, it's the same display as a Kindle. It's an e-ink display. And Kindle's e-ink is very excited about us doing this. They wanted to move beyond Kindles and into consumer products. The nice thing about it is it's high resolution. You can display type that walks you through every step of anything you want to do with the thermostat. You don't need to find that manual that's hidden in your kitchen drawer someplace to do it. And it's usually 3 or 4 or 5 taps on the screen. You've done whatever you wanted to do. And then after about 20 seconds, it'll clear the screen. It's just going to be a real simple thing on your wall. There you see it. It's just going to display the temperature of the room, everything you need to know. And it's very, very elegant and very attractive. We had a number of architects say it's the most beautiful thermostat they've ever seen. And by the way, you see the reason why it's so slim is because most of the stuff is in that J box behind it there. And the front face is low voltage. So we label everything when it goes out. Everything's got color codes and word labels on it to tell you that this is the master bedroom thermostat, this is your master bath thermostat. And inevitably somebody's going to screw it up and put the wrong thermostat in the wrong J box. We tell them just unplug it and plug it in the right one, you're done. You don't need to call up an electrician or a technician to do it. It's as easy as plugging in an extension cord.
Pretty impressive, Terry.
And the thing about it is, it gives us a level of control that's never been possible before, because it's a very fast response system. For the first time, Radiant can really make use of nighttime setback. We could take a room from 65 to 70 degrees in under an hour. So you wake up in the morning, everybody likes to sleep in a 65 degree or thereabouts bedroom and wake up to a 70 degree bedroom. You couldn't do that with Radiant before. This is the first system you can do that with. And the ultimate argument for Radiant is comfort, and nobody's been able to deliver this level of comfort. Our panel was close to it, but it needed this control system and this boiler and everything else we put to extract the maximum performance out of our panel.
Good stuff, man. Terry, let me switch this to Q&A, because I'm seeing that we've only have 37 questions to answer in 20 minutes. We're probably not gonna get to everybody, but I'm gonna try and get to as many of you as possible. And guys, if you haven't posed a question or you're interested in hearing this crew answer your question, drop it on here. And if we don't get to your questions, we're going to have the Warmboard guys try and follow up with you on unanswered questions. But before we switch to that, one thing I do want to mention, these guys sent me a sample kind of builder pack, which I got to say is incredible. These instructions that they send for either the remodel or the new construction, this is the best manufacturer's instructions I've ever seen in my 25-year career as a builder. I mean, beautiful photographs, really clear instructions on every part and piece of the system. All your documentation and literature, I gotta say, Brian and Terry, is just absolutely top notch. Very, very impressive.
Hey, Matt,
let's go to questions. Yeah, Steve.
Just 1 second, because I think it's really important. In that box, do you have the alignment pins and the templates? Was that inside that box?
I don't. I've got that in my photos, but I don't have that.
It's in our video, and that in my last Friday's video and this coming Friday's, it's in there. But the other thing I want to point out in that box that comes out, talking about Warmboard being a team player, they send alignment pins so that aligning the panels is brainless. You just snap these in, and before you screw it down, and then you screw the panels down, you pop them out, you move to the next panel. But it ensures a perfect alignment in all the grooves. And they also send 3 different templates, because these panels are easily modified when you're getting around a door jamb or something like that you're trying to maneuver around. And not only do they send the templates, but they send the router bit. So you don't even have to go shopping for it. Everything to install that panel, modify that panel, is in that box that comes with the system, which, again, it's team player all around. So
we're that much better than IKEA. They only give you an Allen wrench. We go much further than that.
I love it. All right, let me cue this one up. This one was sort of answered already, but I think this is a key question that I like to pose to you, Terry. Pete Porman says, building a house in the Colorado mountains, and Radiant floor systems have a reputation for being slow to warm a cold house because they have to heat the structure before the temperature of the air rises significantly. Is this still an issue with your system? We are
the Ferrari of Radiant systems. First off, by having as much aluminum as we have, aluminum is like, conductivity is like horsepower. And so we just have more horsepower, so we can deliver heat at a faster rate due to our conductivity, the fact that the finished floor is in direct contact with the aluminum plate and that the tube makes good contact. But we're also low mass. But once we came up with the comfort system, What we do is we measure the temperature in your room once a minute. And we have a sensor that's accurate to 1/100th of a degree. And we can tell how fast your room is getting to the temperature, the target temperature that you want to get to. And if we're not getting there faster, our proprietary control system, we call the smart reset controller inside of our boiler, is going to increase the water temperature. It's basically like you have a really smart cruise control. You know, you're climbing a hill, it's going to put the pedal on the gas, it's going to get you there faster. So we can literally take you from 65 to 70 degrees on nighttime setback in under an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. For our vacation setback, we set the house back to 55 degrees. You can usually take a house from about 55 degrees to about 70 degrees in about 1.5 to 2 hours. And it used to be with the old radiant systems, and probably relative to his question, it would take you a day or 2 days to return from vacation setback. Literally, turn it on today and it's warm by tomorrow.
Hey, wow. Man, I got a building science perspective on that. That's a real simple analogy. If you take a Ferrari engine and put it in a Volkswagen, you can't blame the engine for not performing like the Ferrari, right? So you can't take the system and put it into a house that doesn't deliver quality, comfort, air tightness, and such, and then blame it on the system for not performing. It's you know, it goes hand in hand that you have to develop good construction assemblies for anything that you do. I'm not saying that it's required for Warmboard, but what I'm saying is you can't blame the house for not responding if you're not building a good house. So you have to ensure that first all the time.
Hey, Steve, a follow-up question for you on that exact topic. I've gotten several questions. Brooke Stevenson and Neil Patzwald said, basically, how do you compensate for super insulated homes? You know, you're building a house that's passive house or that's really close to passive house. How do you make sure that the house feels toasty, but you don't overheat? Can you answer that for us, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, we work with Warmboard and, you know, they develop the zones. And when you look at the way the zones are laid out, orientation certainly played a role in the way that the zones were laid out and the length of the zones. And, you know, so that plays a major role in how it was planned and designed for this particular house, its orientation, etc.
Yeah, you're going to have some rooms that got a whole big window wall of glazing on it. You're going to need one level of BTU output from them, even if it's a super insulated one. And then you're going to have some rooms which have very little glazing in them and you've got super thick walls on it. And maybe we're only trickling a little bit of heat in there, but we're going to modulate the heat up or down so we always match the heat loss. And there's always heat loss. That's second law of thermodynamics. There's always heat loss. And so whether it's low heat loss or high load, we will always tailor the heat supply to exactly match the heat loss. And that means constant temperature. That means comfort.
Love it. Hey, Larry, I want to pop in with a little point of my own too. We were talking earlier about how long it takes to warm up a house. I don't know this for certain, but one of the builders in Whistler, British Columbia that I saw on my very first seeing of a Warmboard install said one of the things he liked about your system was that his clients, when they came up to the ski resort, this is a mountain house that was only part-time used, they would pull up an app on their phone and turn on the heat saying, hey, we're at the airport. And in 2 hours when they arrived later, the house was warm. Is that a thing?
Yeah, on our comfort system, we have an app for our phone. It's called Vacation Setback. Let's say you're going off on vacation, you forgot to turn your house down. You're on your way to the airport. You open up your app. You go in there, you tap on set vacation mode, and all your thermostats will go to 55 degrees in your house. And then when your wheels touch down and the captain says you can turn on your cell phones, you open up your cell phone, you tap on the vacation app, and you say return. And all your thermostats will go back to the original setting. If your bathrooms are 74, they'll go to 74. If your bedroom was 70, it'll go to, or 68, it'll go to that. And every individual room will remember all of its settings and go back to it. And so typically by the time you got your luggage from the carousel and driven home, your house is warm and toasty.
But typically in the past, Radiant needed forced air as a supplemental system if you forgot to turn on your system. And so for the first day or two, you'd be on forced air. Then eventually by the time you're ready to go home from your ski house, the heat would be on.
The very first Radiant job I did as an architect was for a house up in Wisconsin. Actually, I had a partner, it was his client, but I did a little work on it. And we put in a forced air system and a radiant system because it was a vacation home for exactly the reasons that Brian was suggesting. And it was very, very common in ski areas and stuff like that. You see lots and lots of houses with two systems where with Warmboard you only need one. So that's a big, money savings right there. Plus you don't have the ugly registers, you don't have the noisy blowers, you don't have all the dust and commotion that goes on with forced air and stratification. So finally they have a radiant system that's fast enough to be right in the same ballpark as forced air.
Smart. Let's move on to some other questions. Here's an interesting one that I think would go for really any system, but in particular Warmboard. Skip Burnham says, how do you locate the tubes after the finished floor is installed? I.e., a year later, someone who wasn't a part of the install needs to do something, and they're worried about hitting a tube when they're cutting or changing or fixing a floor squeak or whatever.
Well, turns out, first off, probably the easiest way to do it is hang on to your plans because they're very precisely drawn plans with good dimensions on them, and they're referenced to your floor layout. And so you can say, here's this wall here, this tube is supposed to be out this distance from that wall, and that's where that tube will be. But just in case maybe they didn't follow our plans, a good precaution is to have an infrared gun, and everybody has them these days in the days of COVID. Everybody's got these little guns, and you can sit there and just take your gun and wave it back and forth until you find that tube. And then that's where you don't nail or screw a door stop or whatever you need to attach to the floor.
Yeah.
Smart. Turn the heat on and just see where the heat differences are when the tube is going to be the hottest.
Yeah.
Turn the heat up. Smart. Really smart.
One more thing on that. If you look at the bottom of those panels, if you were to flip around that 8-foot panel around, on the bottom side, we print the pattern of tubing. We did that because very, very early on, we had a cable TV installer come in and install a cable TV and hit a tube from below. And so now for plumbers and electricians who want to come in afterwards and do their work, they can see where the tubes are because there's a line of black type on the bottom of the panel that says tube and above, do not damage, tube and above, do not damage. The right one. Our panel doesn't have it. The S panel has it.
Got it. Let's see if I can move this bad boy around. I didn't do my CrossFit workout today, so I got this to work on. There we go.
Tube and above, do not damage. So you know right where your tubes are.
And it's showing, I don't know if my hand's still in focus, but it's showing the bend of the tube up here as well, if you can see that at the top of my screen. That's cool. I didn't realize that from Steve's job. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's been our approach, throughout the company is that the panel hasn't changed much, but there's been lots of little subtleties. Brian was talking about or maybe Steve was, the press fit of the tube into the groove. Is we finessed endlessly to get just the right press fit so the tube presses in easily, but is retained, for further construction. And that's just been a lot of little subtleties. And we even just recently changed the width of the groove around the turns as opposed to the straight, because we found the turns were popping out because the tube would ovalize slightly when you turn it. And now it's great. And so everybody's raving about how nicely the tube fits in and is retained in our panel.
Love it. We're almost out of time. One of the questions that I'm seeing repeated several times, Donald Andrews, Alistair's son, is basically some version of what's it cost per square foot? What's it cost versus traditional subfloor radiant panel combo? Give us some guidelines, if you can, Terry and Brian, on cost.
We always tend to tell people add about $10 a square foot to what a forced air system would be, plus or minus. So if forced air is going to cost you maybe $5 to $7 a square foot, it's going to cost you maybe $15 to $17 a square foot for a Warmboard project, especially if you do the comfort system. The comfort system, one of its big advantages is reduction of labor. It's a huge advantage. And so we've had lots and lots of radiant installers say that they would typically take a week to build a boiler room. They can do it with our system in a day. And so that drives the labor cost down. And as we know, no offense on labor, but labor walks off the job and does not stay behind. Materials stay behind. Yeah. So we lower the cost by putting great materials in and great systems in that lower the labor cost so you don't waste money on labor that walks off the job.
Love it. That's really good. Guys, I've got several more questions, but I'm running short on time. We've only got 5 or 6 minutes left. I'll scroll through those and see if there's any more, but are there questions or things that we didn't cover that you, Steve, or you guys over at Warmboard want to cover that we missed so far today?
No, but I had a couple people ask about radiant cooling. Can you use this and run chilled water through it, or use that system? And you know,
we knew that question would come up. We played around with it a little bit, and actually this office we're sitting in is an alpha test system, and it has Warmboard in the ceiling. We run chilled water through it, and it's wonderful heat. It's probably a couple of years away from the market right now, so we don't really have it to sell right now. We have had some people that have bought our panels and engineered their own radiant cooling systems, but we haven't been really involved in that. When we come out with radiant cooling, we want it to be fully engineered, ready to go to market, and that's probably a couple of years away, but we're working on it. There's no question about it. It's on our radar.
Cool.
But typically about 90% of the projects get air conditioning over it in the standard form of air conditioning, whether it be forced air or a mini split system that pairs really well with the zoned radiant.
Terry and Brian, I'm seeing a lot of questions about your system with tile on top. Talk to me about a couple of assemblies that work real well with Warmboard and then ultimately tile as the finished surface.
Again, it's subfloor. And whatever tile setting method you like, lots of people back east like mortar beds. My own house has mortar beds in it, but you know, we know backer boards are really popular right now too. They're probably more popular than mortar beds because they're easier and it needs less skill to do so. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we see Durarock, Wonderboard, Hardy Backer all put down there. They're usually thin set on top of, you put thin set on the backside of the backer board before you put it down. And you would do that with us too. Unfortunately, our polyester paint sticks very well with thin set. So the way you would typically do it was either a mortar bed or you're going to put down a backer board. That's the most common method. Some people occasionally think you can set tile directly to subfloor. We see that with regular conventional wood subfloors. You really can't do that. Tile Council of America frowns on that. You're probably going to get cracks at the perimeter of the 4x8 sheet. So we don't recommend that. But we do recommend Tile Council of America's recommendations. And so it's either going to be a backer board in most cases or a mortar bed.
But we're rated to basically be used as a commercial application. So it's got really good adhesion in any tile application that we recommend. It's really going to be a good finish and be really resistant to cracking and pulling up and popping. So it's going to be a very good tile assembly.
Yeah, the TCA gave us their highest rating for use of tile over it. And part of it's because we're so stiff. I mean, we're 1.8 inch thick, so we behave like 1.8 inch subfloor. One of the things, comments we get from contractors all the time is, I can't believe how stiff the floors feel, because it's just really a strong subfloor.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about integration to existing systems? We kind of saw that it's at this house that I was with Steve, so stay tuned for a YouTube video coming up in a week or two to see an existing radiant system with some standard looking wall mounted boilers and baseboard heaters with a hardwood floor install. But I've got a question over here, and I just lost the name of the person asking. Sorry. They're interested in using an exposed concrete basement floor that has tubing in it, and then using comfort board upstairs, Warmboard upstairs with the comfort system. Could that be integrated together with that?
Yes. Currently, we design into basements. Because typically they're below grade and there's not a lot of passive solar gains, so that they can kind of be a very stable system. And then when the frame sections and the raised floor areas are up above grade, we will do the Warmboard where it's fast responding, so it can handle the temperature changes throughout the day. But we can do a combination system with Warmboard panel and tubings in a basement slab.
And one of the nice things about that is our design department. We have an army of mechanical engineers down there, and we're professional engineers. We have licenses, so we have stamps. And so when you do a comfort system, you get a fully engineered and stamped set of plans that mix and match hybrid systems like Brian just described, where you have tubes and a slab in the basement, you have Warmboard on the upper floors, and sometimes we'll mix and match Warmboard S with Warmboard R with a slab, and we do all kinds of things because we're kind of like Burger King. Hold the lettuce, hold the pickles, hold the lettuce. Special orders don't upset us. Have it your way. And that's our approach to our engineering thing. We listen to the architects. As Steve suggested, we want to be partners with architects. That's our biggest go-to market is we go and visit architects. We want to get in early into the project. We want to work hand in hand with the architect. And they work with preliminaries, we work with preliminaries, we send them back and forth, they rating things, we change things as they need until we have a system that's just right for that house.
And then we work all the way through to the install. We show up on the job site and we'll help you install it and give you some tips and directions. And obviously we give you the full documentation and installation kits and everything that you would need to do the install.
Yeah, we have region managers all over North America, and we can't always get down a lonely road up in Maine sometimes. It's too far to travel to, but where possible, we like to go out on every job. And I say better than 50% of our jobs, our RMs are out on the job. And when we can't get out on the job, we use modern virtual messaging, we iPads and FaceTime and stuff like that. We can do virtual on the job site.
We work with all the builders that are currently on the job, whether it be a plumber installing the mechanicals or the framers installing the subfloor.
Love it. Guys, we are running out of time. I've got 1 minute left. I'm going to throw one last question out that's an interesting one that I hadn't thought of that I just saw. It's actually literally our very last comment. Israel Berkowitz said, can you warm a typical 2,500 square foot house using Warmboard on just a standard domestic hot water tank without having to go to a boiler?
We do integrate, that wouldn't be a comfort system project, but we have half of our business is just panel sales. And my own house had a Bradford White, my first heating plant. I've had a bunch of things. I have a Bradford White in there, a CombiCore, which is a water heater. And then I would switch to a Viessmann. Now I have the comfort system, obviously. But yeah, water heaters for smaller jobs work fine.
That's so interesting. I think that's one of my bigger takeaways. When I think about a Southern U.S. home, I'm not installing boilers. I assumed, honestly, before this conversation and before I met Steve last week on the job seeing it, you had to have that 130, 150 degree water temperature to heat floors, when that's not the case. You could use, I think, a Warmboard on a Southern U.S. home with a pretty small system. You wouldn't need necessarily that boiler to get you to those high temps, and especially if you don't have massive BTU needs on a more mild climate.
And while
like
we're on that subject,
US.
we do heat pumps too. So we pair Warmboard with heat pumps. Heat pumps don't like to make water above 120, and so we're in the sweet spot for a heat pump. Most heating systems won't run off of a heat pump unless you put an inline heater, which is very energy inefficient, to bump the water temperature up. But usually the water temperature that comes out of a straight heat pump is just right for Warmboard. So we're a very, very good match. And a lot of, southeastern and
awesome.
more southern places use heat pumps a lot. And so it works great with heat pumps. But by the way, we've even done cogeneration, where people have used fuel cells to generate heated water, and we've heated systems off of those. So we're very adaptable.
Impressive. Guys, I really appreciate your time. Guys, if you're not currently following Steve Baczek's work, go over to buildshownetwork.com. He's posting new videos every Friday, and nearly every hour of the day he's on Instagram, posting some really cool stuff from his job site, answering comments. Steve's the busiest man in Hollywood. Definitely go check out Steve's work. And then big thanks to our Warmboard sponsors today. What a treat to have you, Terry, the original inventor of the company, and Brian, the president. Guys, really appreciate the 411 on your system. I'm sorry for all the comments and questions we weren't able to get to. We'll try and follow up in the future on as many of those as possible. But please reach out to Warmboard. They're incredible people. The service that I've seen from them is just top notch. And this really is a top of the line system. And I think your clients would appreciate knowing about it if you're not currently offering this on your builds or your designs. Guys, big thanks.
One last thing is, when you call us, a human being picks up the phone and they know something. We don't have a phone tree at all. So it's one of the things that people are surprised that they always get a human being on, and they usually know what they're talking about. And if they don't, they'll get you right away to the person that does know what they're talking about.
That's pretty awesome. And if you watch this and want to have someone else watch this, a client, your builder, your architect, we've been recording this. This will be available on Build Show Network very shortly, probably within the next day or two. So if you've got somebody that needs to see this, direct them to this in the future. Guys, big thanks for joining us on this Build Show Live webinar. I'll see you next time on the Build Show.